Welcome back to Wizard of Legend 2. We've done a series of guides. In fact, this is our fourth one, courtesy of the folks over at Humble Games sponsoring this guide segment. Today we have a tier list we're gonna make in regards to the signature spells that are in the game so far. If you don't know what a signature spell is, it is the spell that's denoted with the letter X. No idea what the X stands for. However, it's all of the spells that actually have ultimates tied to it. There's 2 for each element. For wind, we have Zephyr Whirl, Mistral Arrow. For lightning, we have Volt Surge and Dragon Circuit. For fire, we have Flame Breath and Infernal Barrage. For ice, there's Frost Scimitar and Ice Blast. And then finally, earth uses Impaling Drill or Stone Strike Kick. Now, I'm gonna tell you just straight up, there's nothing that's completely unusable here. So I do not have a single signature arcana that's in the F tier. Impaling Drill is a projectile, so anything that's based on projectile will work with it. However, the big issue with Impaling Drill is that it's single target. It will only ever hit the one target, and then perhaps one other that's directly behind it. For the most part, even in a situation like this, it's really hard to get more than just the 2 hits, compared to other signatures that will hit this entire section. The ultimate version solves that issue by allowing you to send out multiple drills at a time. Notice how the farthest back statue gets hit last because it still has the issue that it doesn't pierce. And does give you some pretty decent crowd control if you want to count stunning one monster as crowd control. And when I say stun, I mean stun in air quotes, because if the monster has hyper armor like this, it does not get stunned. It will actually try to swing at you. And that includes bosses too, but most crowd control doesn't work on bosses anyway if they aren't broken on stagger. It's not even like the best way to put monsters into pits either, because it takes so long for that drill to actually catch up. Impaling Drill could maybe push the monster back a little bit further. That is technically what the variant does, where you actually launch yourself forward as the drill, and that thing's super fun. Stone Strike Kick is about as dangerous to use as Zephyr Whirl. This is a melee maneuver, so it actually puts you in range of monsters. If a monster cannot be pushed, the monster will stay right next to you, and that is extremely dangerous. If you look at the damage, I can't really show you how much damage this truly does on a training dummy, and the reason why is because of something called Fracture. Fracture causes the monster to take damage whenever it moves, so these are taking like a free 3 damage just for getting pushed, which I think is actually fairly strong. The ultimate version does an invulnerable multi-hit attack that groups up any monster that's in range, does damage, knocks them backward, which could do a stun effect, and applies Fracture all at the same time. That's a lot of stuff. The only thing that this fails at is if it's a beefy target that's gonna attack you while you're actually kicking it. You do not have iframes in the kick. So with that, I'm actually gonna surprise myself again. I'm gonna move this into the A tier. Fracture actually does an incredible amount of damage, even on monsters like the Thunder God. That Fracture does damage whenever he moves around, and trust me, he moves a lot, so it's gonna add up. The next C tier spell that we have is one of the Frost Arcana known as Frost Scimitar. This might be like a little bit of a recurring theme, but this one also is single target. It does have like the chance to get multiple enemies. It's not great at it because it actually stops at the first enemy it touches. So you'll oftentimes have a mob like this and only really hit the one. I think the big fun factor to it is you're supposed to be able to like drag the statues as far as you want, which is kind of funny. And I guess the longer they keep dragging, the more damage they take. They even have a chance to slam at the end of it, but like, what are the chances that actually happens? It's fairly low. Again, the ultimate version of the signature tries to solve the issue of the single target by letting you fire out multiple scimitars that will pull basically the entire room. Now, the other reason why this is in the C tier is because you are pulling enemies towards you And oftentimes in Wizard of Legend, unless you have a specific melee build, pulling enemies is not a good idea. Especially if the monster has armor to it, there's a really good chance that it will simply swing at you once you get it into range. And that means the best use of Frost Scimitar is if you have to have either a second crowd control button, like some kind of freeze or a knockup, or if you can charge up another spell while they're being dragged to you. Again, not unusable, but still not as good as some of the other stuff that's in the game. Maybe allow the scimitar to freeze the monster. I'm not exactly sure why it pulls things towards you. I don't know if that's really something water wants to do. This one might be a little controversial, but I'm actually a really big fan of the Frost Blast. It doesn't do any damage, really. This does count as a status effect. It's essentially a better version of Zephyr Whirl, except it can't pull the monsters in to stack on top of each other. Keep in mind it only takes one hit to break through ice, so don't think that the ice is somehow the best way to get through Wizard of Legend. And in fact, bosses do not care about the ice at all. The ultimate version, however, is actually pretty good. It hits everything on the screen. It does a sizable amount of damage. I've actually had builds where that was my main DPS. It makes you invulnerable during the whole process, and then at the end of it all, the monsters are frozen. And they stay frozen for a long time. Like, I've been able to wait out whole cooldowns after I did the signature spell, just to give myself an easier time to kill stuff. Infernal Barrage, this one is in the B tier, but let me go ahead and say it has pretty much the same issues as the other ones. This is a pure DPS spell, doesn't really have any crowd control to it. If you hold down the attack button, it actually fires out more bullets, but there is almost zero chance that you hit multiple enemies with this thing. However, when you use the ultimate version and hold it down, all of a sudden you pierce and you do a crap ton of damage. This is, in my opinion, better than the Frost Scimitar, and kinda better than the drill only because it will hit the entire hallway. As long as you're not bombarded by a ton of stuff, the one monster kill is enough that you can then transition into whatever monster was next to it. And then of course, once you get your signature, you have one delete button for one monster and whoever's unlucky enough to be behind it. Even though that might sound strong, it's only strong enough to be in the B tier. There's still stuff better than that. And of course, we have its Fire Twin, aka Flame Breath. Once again, another Dragon Arcana, works with any dragon buffs that you're carrying. This thing does burn. In fact, it's the only signature spell that you have that does burn. The burn effect is damage over time. At level 1, it's like 5 damage a tick, which is almost more damage than some of the other signature spells' base damage. The Dragon Breath itself does about like 15 damage or so. It's nothing impressive. Really, a big chunk of the damage is from the burn. The ultimate, however, you summon a giant dragon head, do a gigantic flame breath that even does burn at the end. But the bonus point to this, you can move this. You can hit 360 degrees around you. You have iframes during the whole process, and you're able to clear the room. Think about all the other signature ultimates that you've seen thus far. What compares to that? There really isn't anything except maybe the Frost Blast, but clearly this does more damage. And as nice as it is to have a frozen monster, having a dead monster is even better. Zephyr Whirl is probably the lowest DPS skill in the game. All you do is you pull the enemies together, they take one single hit, and then get slowed. That means if you're getting any enhancements that increase the damage of this thing, you are only ever getting the boost on that one hit, except for the ultimate. The slow is actually like fairly valuable. You'll notice once you get into monsters that have the yellow bar, that's the armor, that you'll have an easier chance landing your melee combos and having to dodge less because the monster's slowed. Slow is also a status effect, so if you have anything that does bonus to status effects, that will increase your damage. The ultimate version leaves the tornado on the ground, moves the monsters around if they're mobile, and does constant damage over time. It also does the slow effect. So the reason why this thing's in the B tier is I actually value that slow pretty highly, because as a melee player, you're gonna have a lot of difficulty actually doing any melee attacks if the monster's allowed to essentially play the game. The ultimate tornado actually causes the airborne status. So aside from the monster being slowed, if it can be picked up, the airborne status does have synergies with some of your other Arcana. All in all, don't build Zephyr Whirl as a DPS machine, build it as a way to actually do damage with everything else in your kit. This one has zero crowd control capability at all. It is purely a DPS machine. However, the DPS on it, not very good, just to say that. You essentially get 3 shots that you can fire off. Each shot does around 10 to 15 damage, not really a high number, considering things like Infernal Barrage does 10 damage on every single bullet, just without the pierce. In an actual run, I find that the arrow doesn't really do anything at all, especially once enemies have armor. You're essentially just tickling them while they're still firing out their attacks at you, and they aren't really staggering from it at all. The only nice thing you have is if there's a group of monsters lined up, then you're able to do your ability. I will say that the signature does actually do significant damage, the ultimate that is, and because it has a shotgunning effect, the closer you are to the monster, the more damage you're dealing. However, I don't think that's actually all that worth it compared to the other options you have. Again, unless you have a wind-focused build, I think I'd still rather use Zephyr Whirl over this. So for that reason, I'm actually gonna move this down from the B tier to the C tier. I actually had to test this out to even see if I wanted to stay in B. Volt Surge is very simple. It does lightning strikes that connect between multiple targets. The damage isn't obscenely high. Most of it's tied to the shock status effect. So I think you're gonna have to get like bonus damage to status effect enemies in order to scale that up. But what you don't know is that the shock status actually stops enemies from making any actions. So while the lightning's bouncing around, you can actually do some damage to the monster without worry of them retaliating. The ultimate version of this sends out lightning in pretty much every direction. It does a crap ton of damage. The only issue with it is that you can't control who's getting hit by it. Ideally, since you have iframes, you would go into the center of the mob, then do your attack, and then hopefully you're hitting everybody. I find this to be sort of a mix between the Zephyr Whirl and just a regular DPS spell. It does a light amount of crowd control, just enough to be able to do some damage. However, be warned, if the monster has armor, it will not be stunned by the shock. We have Dragon Circuit. Anything that boosts dragon spells does work with this. You get 2 uses of it. It fires out like a figure 8 that hits any monster that can kind of be in range of it. And then at the end, it does a lightning bolt that will actually find new monsters if those first ones happen to die. However, you get 2 uses of this for some reason. So you can spam them if you want to, but chances are you'll layer it one time, do your basic attacks, then do a second layer of it. The ultimate version does a better version of the Voltic Surge, hits pretty much anything on the screen, and then at the end, you still get the lightning bolts that the Thunder Dragon usually does in the first place. So a lot of damage, a lot of crowd control, you get invulnerability during that process, and it kind of outclasses most of the other signature Arcanas in the game. One thing that Dragon Circuit doesn't even mention is the fact that it does shock. So when the lightning bolt comes down, if a monster doesn't have armor, it is actually getting shocked by it, which is crowd control. You don't even have to hit the target to get the lightning strike to actually touch it. You could just fire off the Dragon Circuit off in the middle of nowhere, and the game will intelligently try to land the lightning bolt on a monster. That's kind of strong, and I don't know how this is not in the S tier. So I would say that is my list for signature Arcana. I'm actually excited to see what others the devs are actually going to add to the game. I think this is a good starting point. I would like to see some buffs to the bottom performers, and then everything else could maybe get some DPS tweaks, numbers adjustments, and then how much it impacts the boss. After all of that's done, I think it will be fairly balanced. But right now, if you want to blow through the game with what I think is the strongest things, you're taking either the dragon signatures, the stone strike kick for fracture, or the ice blast for its ultimate. There are of course tons and tons of other Arcana in the game. The next time we do a tier list will probably be once they've added some new ones. If you have a specific spell that you enjoy the most, let me know in the comments. And of course, if you want to see more about Wizard of Legend 2, here's a couple of videos on the screen you can take a look at. Otherwise, hope you enjoyed the video, and I will catch you on the next one.